Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of The Witch, Part 2, The Other One, a Korean thriller action hybrid from 2022 that is a sequel to The Witch, Part 1, The Subversion, which came out in 2018. This is one of my most highly anticipated films of this year, so does it live up to expectations? Let's find out. After a mysterious girl emerges as a sole survivor of a bloody raid on a research facility behind the top-secret witch program, she is rescued by a pair of civilians who soon realize the girl is both very powerful and in very grave danger. However, as the assassins tasked with locating and silencing the girl move closer, the lives of everyone around her fall under increasingly great peril. Now, the premise of that sounds very similar to the premise of the first film, only with a different character. And that is kind of what we get here early on. Starts off very similar fashion. You get images of a girl presumably escaping a research facility that was performing experiments on children or young people. The first character we follow is a schoolgirl who has a best friend, just like the original film. And then we get a scene that's just like ripped from Battle Royale, where a whole school bus full of kids is like gassed with sleeping gas. And then this girl is abducted. And then the bad guys tell her that she is pregnant with special twins. And then we get a time jump years later, where we meet our lead protagonist, is a girl who wakes up after destroying a laboratory facility. So, going into this sequel, I was really hoping for it to be as good as, or even better than, the first film. And I say this because the same director returns, Hoon-jung, a very reliable director. He directed New World, The Tiger. This guy's a good director. Another reason why I had high expectations is because the first movie had room for improvement. I really did enjoy the first film, but there was some room for improvement there. I'm talking specifically about the pacing and the quantity of action. I wanted a faster pace, and I wanted more action. Now, unfortunately, we get the exact opposite in this film. So this movie is 2 hours and 17 minutes long, which is 12 minutes longer than its predecessor, and you can feel it in this one. I mean, you could feel it a little bit in the first one, but you can really feel it in the sequel. It takes an hour to get to the first legitimate action set piece. An entire hour, almost. Now, not necessarily a problem if you have a good script, but the writing in The Witch Part 2 is not very good. It's certainly more confusing than the first movie. I mean, especially the structure of there's this evil organization, right? The Witch Program. But it has all these different factions in it that's presented in this film. And I still have no idea how this organization actually works. You know, they make vague references to stuff that happened in the past, which is something this movie does a lot, without really fleshing out what actually has happened. But I don't really understand why these factions are fighting against each other so much. Maybe they explained it in one or two lines of dialogue that I missed, but it's certainly not developed very well. And in a fast-paced action movie, I wouldn't care. But in this movie, there is a ton of filler material, so you think about it more, right? It becomes more of a problem. And then, on top of that, we have a separate group of bad guys who have nothing to do, apparently, with the evil organization. So, okay. And then later on, they introduce more characters. Another group of bad guys. So we have 4 different groups of bad guys in this movie, if I'm following correctly. And I actually paused the movie multiple times and I had to sit there and just kind of think about what was happening. This movie's kind of a mess. It really is. But yeah, we have 4 groups of bad guys, I guess. And there were other guys too who showed up at the end. There might have been a 5th group. I lost count. But the writing in this movie is very messy. And I'm familiar with Korean action films that are probably a little bit too convoluted for their own good, Jason Bourne knockoffs, or clone movies, as I call them. The Berlin File, The Suspect, you can even put Assassination in there. that are, they're kind of complicated. You really got to kind of think to keep up with it. But in those movies, you had a brisk pace, stuff was happening, and there was a sense of urgency. And all of those things The Witch 2 does not have. So it becomes more of a problem here. But thankfully, the acting is good in this, for the most part. It is. Kind of difficult to follow up Kim Da-mi's performance in the first film. We have a new lead actress playing a different character. Her name is, the actress's name is Shin-si Ah. I think she did a good job. But the script doesn't really help her much. They really limit her dialogue, and they do not give her a memorable personality. Like the protagonist in the first movie, by the end, she was a pretty memorable character, right? The protagonist in this one's very vanilla. Very vanilla. One thing I certainly did enjoy about the movie, though, is the bloody imagery. I mean, we get nice shots of dead bodies after a slaughter happens, nasty, knife strikes, some cool death scenes, one of which involves, shards of wood. I like how the violence is filmed here has a visceral entertainment value to it, which I really like. Now, on the other hand, there are certain elements of the violence and action that frustrated me. Okay? So, for example, I really like the aftermath imagery of, the laboratory facility slaughters. And they do this, 2 or 3 times in the movie where all of a sudden they'll cut to a girl in a hallway, covered in blood. Whether it's, the girl who was experimented on, there was a lady who's, a special forces agent. Almost like the same scene. She just wakes up after, a slaughter happens in a research facility. I would have liked to have actually seen the action scene, though. Instead of them constantly doing this shtick of, showing aftermath scenes. You know what I mean? Instead of actually showing the action. And they do this, 2 or 3 times during the opening hour, and I was starting to get frustrated. So I'm are we going to get any action scenes in this movie? So that frustrated me a little bit. Like I mentioned earlier, we get a set piece near the 1 hour mark. It involves a car chase and a dude using a car door as a weapon. You see it, I think they showed part of it in the trailer. Pretty good scene. I did like it. The CGI in this film is even more cartoonish than the first, so just keep that in mind. But I did enjoy that scene. And then 10 minutes after that, we get another action scene. So I'm like, all right, this film's starting to heat up. It's like a farmhouse scene that's got some good stuff in it. But then the momentum stalls again. Another 30-minute gap between that second set piece and the finale. There is no reason why this movie should have been 2 hours and 17 minutes long. I'm telling you right now. You could have edited this down to $1:45, man. Seriously. But we get the finale. It has a cool backdrop of fireworks. So I'm all right, this is actually a pretty sweet setup here. You get to get some cool visuals, a nice aesthetic for a fight. But then the cartoonishness just gets over the top. I mean, we get the violence, which is nice, but, these characters are just, they're superheroes. We're talking full-on Marvel DC, upper level abilities. And it's just I liked the first movie because it was it had that thriller action vibe where you had human beings with superhuman abilities, but it wasn't that crazy. This movie just goes crazy with it. It just goes crazy. It loses its groundedness in the action design, and I didn't really like that. Now, you have this thing that this movie also does. A lot of characters in this movie, because remember, we have a ton of dull filler, and during that dull filler, you got characters talking crap to each other all the time. Just talking crap. Talking smack. Oh, I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna do this. I'm a master killer. And then these characters in the finale, I'm not gonna spoil it for you, but some of these characters who've been yapping, done in 2 seconds. I'm what is this? The finale, again, you get the violence, but characters just drop like flies. I'm how is this a climax to an action movie? And there's one character in the movie, it's just dead. A wave of a hand, you're dead. You're dead. No effort at all. None at all. So it really, man, I think they dropped the ball with parts of the finale here. It's just, some of the characters here are just too OP, too overpowered. Yeah, but Yeah, I had some problems with the action as well. I did enjoy parts of the action, though. I did. The violence. There were a few cool moves and stuff during the finale, but it constantly. This movie was like taking one step forward and then one or two steps back, like throughout. I think the sequel had like all of the opportunity to improve on its predecessor, but it's actually a step down on almost every level across the board. Same director too, so that perplexes me. It does. They do set up a third film, but my anticipation for that third film is nowhere near what my anticipation was for this one. So to kind of summarize my thoughts on this, like The Witch Part 2 is kind of badly paced, messy. It does have some good acting in it, some good action moments that are still kind of frustrating to watch at times, and some good violence. So it's kind of like, it's difficult for me to really recommend this to people. Like, if I was forced to like give it a grade, it would be like barely passable for like one viewing. I don't really see myself watching this movie again. I have the first film in my collection, and I will watch it again because it's legitimately good. This one's like real flimsy. And for the purposes of comparison, right? Just a few days ago, I reviewed a Japanese action movie, The Fable, another movie that was not exactly action-packed, but the writing was engaging enough, and the last action scene is more satisfying than the one in this movie. And I don't even think it's close. The finale in The Fable was better than the finale of The Witch Part 2. So, just to give you, it was just a fortuitous coincidence I reviewed both movies this week. But after watching The Fable, I was satisfied. After watching this, not so much. So, if you're a fan of the first one, I mean, you're probably going to end up watching it to make up your own opinion. I would just tell you that don't go in with the expectations that I had. Go in with, like, tempered or lowered expectations. And, maybe you'll like it more than I did. But let me know what you think of it. It's available streaming and on physical media as well. And as always, I will see you next time.